It is 2018. You're standing in a pharmacy in Caracas, Venezuela. Your daughter has a fever that is not broken in 4 days. She needs antibiotics. You have been to 6 pharmacies. The shelves are empty in all of them. But you are not panicking. Not yet. Because 3 years ago, you did something smart. Something most of your neighbors didn't do. You converted 20% of your savings into gold. Physical gold. Coins. Hidden in your house where no government, no bank failure, no currency collapse could touch it. You find a man on the black market. He has medicine. Not everything, but something. You reach into your bag and pull out a coin. 1 ounce. Worth more than most Venezuelans earn in a year. He looks at it. Then he looks at you. What am I supposed to do with that? You stare at him. I need gasoline, he says. I need someone who can fix my generator. I need rice. I need something I can use today, not gold. You walk home empty-handed. That moment, that specific moment, is the moment this entire channel exists to study. Before we go further, let me be direct about what this video is and what it is not. This is not an argument against gold. Gold has preserved wealth across centuries, across empires, across monetary collapses that wiped out everything else. Anyone who dismisses gold entirely has not read enough monetary history, and I will not be making that mistake here. What this video is an honest forensic examination of a question almost nobody in the financial preparedness space will ask out loud. What happens when gold isn't enough? Not because gold lost its value, but because the system that allows you to exchange gold for things you need, that system stopped working. There's a pattern in history. It appears in every severe collapse. It is documented, consistent, and almost entirely ignored by the financial preparedness community. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The conventional narrative in this space goes like this. Governments print money, currencies debase, paper wealth evaporates, but those who hold real money, gold, silver, retain purchasing power. They emerge from the chaos intact. They win. This story is not wrong. It is incomplete. It assumes the existence of a functioning exchange system to emerge into. It assumes there are goods to buy. It assumes there are sellers who want gold. It assumes the infrastructure of trade, logistics, distribution, trust is still operating, even if strained. In a hyperinflation, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Argentina 2001, those assumptions usually hold. The currency collapses, but farmers still bring food to market. Merchants still accept payment, just not in the dying currency. Gold performs in these scenarios exactly as advertised. But hyperinflation is not the only form of collapse. There's another kind, rarer, deeper, more dislocating. It is what happens when the system itself stops functioning. Not the currency, the supply chains, the logistics infrastructure, the distribution networks, the institutional coordination, the social trust. In those collapses, gold behaves very differently, and almost nobody talks about it. To understand why, we need to be precise about what gold actually is, mechanically, structurally. Gold is not wealth. Gold is a claim on wealth. This is not semantics. This distinction is the entire argument. Wealth is food, shelter, medicine, energy, tools, skills, services, the capacity to produce these things. These are the things that keep human beings alive and functioning. Gold is a token. A highly durable, universally recognized, historically trusted token that allows you to exchange for wealth across time and space. It stores value. It transfers value. But it does not create value. In a stable system, or even a destabilized but still functional system, this distinction doesn't matter. You trade gold for what you need. The token works. But in a fractured system, the distinction is everything. Because tokens require counterparties. You cannot eat gold. You cannot heat your home with gold. You cannot cure an infection with gold. You cannot rebuild a broken generator with gold. Gold's value is entirely derivative. It depends completely on your ability to exchange it for things that actually do those jobs. And exchange requires infrastructure. It requires someone who has what you need. It requires that person to be reachable. It requires them to trust that your gold is genuine. It requires them to want gold in the first place, which itself requires them to believe that someone else later will also accept it. Remove any single link in that chain and the token becomes inert. Not worthless in an absolute sense. Inert, unable to function, like a key to a door that no longer exists. This is where the historical record begins, telling a very different story than the gold newsletters. The Soviet Union disintegrates. 15 republics fracture into independence almost overnight. The ruble, already strained, becomes nearly worthless. Hyperinflation follows rapidly. By the gold narrative, this should have been the gold holders' moment. And in a narrow sense, it was those who held gold retained something when the currency died. But here is what the gold narrative consistently misses about the Soviet collapse. The real crisis was not monetary, it was logistical. Whatever its political failures, the Soviet system had one functional achievement: centralized distribution. Goods moved on state-directed supply chains. Factories produced, farms delivered. Clinics received medicine. The mechanism existed and operated, however, inefficiently. When the state collapsed, the distribution mechanism collapsed with it. Store shelves emptied, not because there was no food in the country, but because the system that moved food from farms to shelves no longer existed. No one knew who to invoice. Factories sat idle, not because workers were unwilling, but because no one could source raw materials or establish who was now responsible for payment. Gold could not solve that problem. Gold could not rebuild a supply chain. Gold could not tell a truck driver who to deliver to or guarantee he would be paid in something stable enough to matter. The people who survived best in the early post-Soviet period were not gold holders. They were people with direct access to production. Dacha owners who could grow food, rural families with chickens and potatoes, urban residents with dense networks of relationships, people who knew mechanics, doctors, farmers, black market traders. The currency of survival was not gold. It was relationships, skills, and the ability to create or access real goods outside the collapsed distribution system. This is documented extensively. It is not interpretation. The accounts from that era are strikingly consistent across regions, across social classes, across political backgrounds. What mattered in the Soviet collapse was who you knew and what you could do. Now let us examine the most extreme case available in the modern historical record. The siege of Leningrad, 1941 to 1944. Nazi forces encircled the city, one of the most complete blockades in modern warfare. No food came in, no fuel, no medicine, nearly 900 days. There were wealthy people in Leningrad, people with gold, jewelry, family heirlooms accumulated over generations. In the early months of the siege, gold functioned. Black markets accepted it. You could buy food at horrific exchange rates, but you could buy it. Then, as food supplies inside the city were exhausted, the exchange stopped. Not because gold lost value in some abstract monetary sense, because there was nothing left to buy. The counterparty, the seller with goods, ceased to exist. The exchange assumption broke completely. What determined survival at that point was not stored monetary value. It was ration card access, connections to factory workers who received state allocations, a family member in the military, the ability to grow something, anything, in a tiny plot within the city limits. Gold could not create bread when there was no bread. Sit with that for a moment. This is not an edge case. This is the logical endpoint of what happens when the exchange assumption fails completely. And while most collapses do not reach Leningrad-level severity, the mechanism is identical. It is the same failure at different intensities. There is a mental model that I want to name precisely because naming it clearly is the only way to reason about it. I call it the exchange assumption. The exchange assumption is the belief, usually unconscious, so embedded in modern life that it is invisible, that you will always be able to convert one form of value into another, that money becomes goods, that gold becomes food, that stored wealth converts into survival when needed. Modern civilization is entirely built on this assumption. It is why we specialize. It is why a software engineer can spend 40 hours a week writing code and trust that the resulting salary will convert into groceries, housing, medicine, and clothing, none of which that engineer produced or could produce. The exchange assumption is valid almost all of the time, until it isn't. In a hyperinflation, the exchange assumption bends but does not break. The currency fails, but exchange itself continues. Gold works because the underlying system, while severely strained, still functions. In a true systemic collapse, supply chain failure, grid failure, institutional disintegration, complete breakdown of distribution infrastructure, the exchange assumption breaks entirely. When it breaks, gold becomes a token with historical prestige and no current function. Argentina 2001 illustrates the middle ground. The banking system froze overnight. The peso collapsed. Middle-class families found their savings locked in banks that might never reopen. Gold holders fared better than those who held pesos. That is true. But who fared best? Rural families and farmers, communities with local economies. And remarkably, in Buenos Aires, neighborhood assemblies formed spontaneously in which people who had never spoken to their neighbors organized barter exchange systems. Services for goods. Skills for food, no currency at all. The people who thrived were not those with the most stored value. They were those who could produce value and were embedded in networks of trust. Zimbabwe, 2008. The most extreme peacetime hyperinflation in modern history. A loaf of bread reached 100 trillion Zimbabwean dollars. Gold helped. US dollars helped more. They became the de facto currency. But even then, what ultimately determined power in the economy was access to goods. Farmers with food had power. Traders with functioning supply connections had power. Mechanics, doctors, electricians, people with skills that produced tangible value, had power. Gold was a medium of exchange. It let you participate in a market. But the market required goods to exist, and the capacity to produce those goods conferred more power than the capacity to buy them. If you study American communities across the past century, one pattern stands out as almost inexplicably anomalous. The Amish, they reject grid electricity, they travel by horse, they farm using methods that predate the internal combustion engine. By virtually every conventional economic measure, they are significantly poorer than average Americans. And yet, by measures of stability, resilience, and community function, they consistently outperform the mainstream economy during every period of external stress. Amish communities have near zero rates of bankruptcy, near zero homelessness, near zero dependence on government assistance. During the Great Depression, while surrounding communities lost farms to foreclosure, while unemployment in industrial cities reached catastrophic levels, most Amish communities remained functionally intact. During the 2008 financial crisis, they reported minimal disruption. This is not because they are wealthy. They are not. It is because they are structured differently. Let me define precisely what that structure consists of, because this is the core of what I am calling the Amish Hedge. First, local production capacity. The ability to produce essentials, food, shelter, basic medicine, tools, energy, within the community without dependence on external supply chains. When the trucks stop coming, Amish production continues because it never depended on trucks coming. Second, diversified skills. A community where individuals can do multiple things. One person farms, another builds, another repairs, another has medical knowledge. In a stable system, specialization maximizes efficiency. In an unstable system, diversification maximizes survival. The Amish optimize for the latter. Third, low energy dependence, minimal fossil fuels, minimal grid electricity. This is not romanticism, it is structural insulation. They are not exposed to grid failure. They are not exposed to oil price shocks. Their production continues regardless of what happens in global energy markets. Fourth, thick social networks with embedded obligation. Amish mutual aid is not charity. It is not sentiment. It is structure. When a family's barn burns, the community rebuilds it, not because people feel generous that week, but because the social contract requires it. This is a distributed insurance system that requires no currency, no institution, and no functioning exchange infrastructure to operate. Fifth, minimal debt. Amish communities carry almost no debt. They are not leveraged. They are not exposed to interest rate changes or credit contractions. Their consumption is bounded by what they can produce or afford outright. Sixth, a closed-loop economy. Much Amish exchange happens internally, within the community, favoring Amish businesses, keeping value circulating within the network. This insulates them from external demand shocks in a way that no financial hedge can replicate. Put those 6 elements together, and you get a community that is structurally immune to the type of systemic collapse that gold is supposed to, but cannot protect against. Here is the uncomfortable part. You cannot buy the Amish Hedge. You cannot order it online. You cannot store it in a vault or a safe deposit box. It is not an asset. It is a structure. And structures require decades to build. This is the trap that most people in the financial preparedness space fall into. They approach resilience as a purchasing problem. Buy gold, buy freeze-dried food, buy land, buy guns. None of those things are useless, but none of them address the core vulnerability. What happens when you have land but no one to work it? Tools but no skills to use them? Food but no security to keep it? Gold but no counterparties willing to accept it? The Amish did not prepare for collapse. They built a way of life that does not require the external system to function. That is not preparation. That is structural independence. Those are categorically different things. There is a reason you have heard thousands of times that gold is the ultimate hedge. Gold has a marketing apparatus. Gold dealers need you to buy gold. Gold newsletters need you to fear currency collapse. Gold is a high-margin product with genuine historical credibility and enormous emotional appeal. The marketing practically writes itself. The Amish Hedge has no marketing apparatus. Nobody profits from telling you to build community. Nobody sells you the skill of repairing a generator or growing food or earning the trust of your neighbors. There is no industry, no newsletter, no YouTube channel with a financial interest in recommending that you localize your food supply or eliminate your debt or deepen your social relationships. So one message reaches you thousands of times. The other reaches you almost never. This is not a conspiracy. It is incentive structure. The ideas that spread are the ideas that benefit from spreading. Understanding that asymmetry is essential to evaluating any information you receive about resilience, about risk, about what it means to be genuinely prepared. The financial preparedness narrative, overwhelmingly funded by people who profit from gold sales, has given you an incomplete picture. Not a dishonest one, necessarily. An incomplete one. Gold addresses monetary failure within a functioning system. It does not address systemic failure, and if you are honest about the range of risks you actually face, you need to consider both categories, because history shows that both occur, and they require fundamentally different responses. The mechanism we are describing is not new. It is ancient. Every complex civilization in recorded history has faced moments where the exchange assumption failed, the Western Roman Empire in its final 2 centuries. The Late Bronze Age collapse, one of the most total systemic failures in human history, in which interconnected palace economies across the Eastern Mediterranean collapsed within a single generation. The fall of classic Maya city-states, the post-plague economy of 14th century Europe. In each case, the pattern is consistent. Wealth stored in monetary form became less valuable than wealth stored in productive capacity. The people who survived best were not the wealthiest. They were the most structurally resilient. Communities with local food production, networks of mutual obligation, diversified skills, low dependence on the external trade systems that had just collapsed. And in each case, critically, there was no warning that allowed for last-minute adaptation. You cannot learn to farm in a week. You cannot build a community of trust during a crisis. You cannot create local production capacity after the supply chains have already failed. These things take years, decades, sometimes generations. That is the irreversible constraint. If you wait until you need the Amish Hedge, you will already be too late. Let me be specific about what this analysis implies, not as financial advice, but as a framework for honest risk assessment. If you are concerned about collapse, and whether from currency failure, energy shocks, supply chain fragility, or institutional breakdown, your preparation should be structural, not merely stockpiled. Ask yourself honestly, do you know the people in your immediate geographic community well enough that those relationships could function as a barter or mutual aid network under stress? If not, that is a gap that no amount of stored gold addresses. Ask yourself, does your household depend entirely on external supply chains for food, energy, and medicine? What actually happens if those chains are disrupted for 30 days? 90 days? Because the answer to that question tells you more about your real resilience than your balance sheet does. Ask yourself, are you carrying significant debt? Debt is a claim on your future production. In a systemic crisis, that claim becomes a constraint, sometimes a catastrophic one. The Amish prohibition on debt is not moral posturing. It is structural engineering. Ask yourself, can you produce anything, fix anything, build anything, grow anything? Because in a fractured exchange system, those capabilities become the actual currency, not the stored token, but the living capacity. None of this requires becoming Amish. It requires recognizing that resilience is a spectrum, that most modern people sit near the completely dependent end of that spectrum, and that deliberate incremental movement in the other direction, building skills, reducing debt, deepening community, reducing supply chain dependence, compounds over time exactly the way financial assets do. It is just that nobody is selling it, so nobody is telling you. Let me leave you with the question that this entire analysis circles back to. In any collapse, whether monetary, logistical, or complete, there are 2 types of people, those who hold tokens and those who hold the capacity to produce. In a currency collapse, the token holder wins because the exchange infrastructure is still intact. The token still functions, the capacity to trade still exists. In a systemic collapse, the producer wins because when the exchange infrastructure fails, the token becomes inert and only direct productive capacity retains value. The question is not which collapse is more likely. History suggests both occur, with different frequencies and different warning times. The question is whether your current position gives you any resilience in the second scenario, the one the gold narrative doesn't discuss, or whether all of your preparation is optimized for a world where the exchange infrastructure never truly breaks. The Amish answered that question generations ago, structurally, at the level of how they built their entire way of life. They did not hedge against collapse. They built a life that does not require the external system to function. That is a different thing entirely. And it is worth understanding, not to copy it exactly, but to extract its logic and apply it wherever you can, within whatever life you are actually living. Now, here is what I want you to do before you close this video. Not subscribe, not yet. Think first. Think about the 6 elements of the Amish Hedge: local production, diversified skills, low energy dependence, thick social networks, minimal debt, closed loop economy. Pick one, just one. Ask yourself honestly, where do you sit on that dimension right now? And what would it look like to move 10% in the right direction over the next 12 months? That is the actual exercise, not buying something. Thinking structurally about a gap in your resilience and committing to one concrete action. If this kind of forensic systems-level analysis is the lens you want to develop, if you want to understand the patterns that complex systems follow before they fail, not after, then this channel is built for you. Every video on this channel follows the same discipline. We examine history, we identify the mechanisms, we name the patterns, and we ask the questions that nobody with a financial interest in your attention is asking. Subscribe if that is the kind of thinking you want more of. It costs you nothing, and it tells the algorithm that this kind of depth is worth surfacing. If this video made you think differently about something, You thought you already understood. Share it with one person who would engage with it seriously, not to go viral, because the ideas in here are genuinely more useful when more people are thinking about them. And leave a comment below with your answer to this question. Which of the 6 Amish Hedge elements is your biggest gap right now? Production capacity, skills, energy dependence, community networks, debt, or closed-loop economy? I read every comment. The answers people leave shape what this channel covers next. The pattern is already in motion. Most people will not see it until the shelf is empty and the gold is useless. You just saw it.